You know, it's interesting that defense counsel accuses the state of presenting multiple theories when that's exactly what he did throughout his entire closing argument, isn't it? It's kind of cute, actually. I mean, hey, the state's got multiple theories, but here's a couple of ours. If he didn't cause it, then he's not guilty. But if you find that he did cause it, well, he's acting in self-defense. But which is it? Pick one. You either knew what you were doing, and you were justified in doing it, or you didn't cause the act. Now, defense counsel complains about the complicity language. But the problem with that complaint is it goes to one of the multiple theories that he wants you to believe. See, he wants you to believe through his expert that it was Khalil Mossad who most likely caused the fatal damage. Or maybe it was a stroke. Or maybe it was something that happened 6 weeks ago. Maybe it was the Keppra that he took that did it. Oh, no, wait, no, that was actually given to the hospital through medical treatment before Mr. Wimpey put him in the hospital. Maybe it was the fentanyl. That's got to be it. Nope. Hospital gave him that too. Their expert didn't even know the difference between BAC and urine. And it's in the report that's submitted into evidence. They referred to as 0.14 BAC when it was a reading from urine. And don't listen to this nonsense about, oh, he's right-handed, and each time he hit him with the left hook. Watch that first combination of punches that the defendant throws on Mr. Vasquez. It looks like Mr. Wimpey's pretty comfortable using that left hand. And he also looks pretty comfortable using that left hand when he knocks him to the ground in camera angle 5. And again with that last punch that puts him to the ground. So no, it doesn't matter that he's right-handed, because he's fully capable of inflicting damage with his left hand. And you saw that firsthand on video. Now let's talk about this invasion of space, because that's this big deal that defense counsel's been talking about. He felt crowded. There were people around him. Well, if it was that threatening, then why didn't his friends stand up next to him? If you notice, Mr. Mossad just kind of hanging out. Mr. Vasquez kind of looking to see what's going on. Now this is a threat because he could have a weapon. What do you think? Think this is threatening behavior? Threatening posture? But see, the space that he's surrounded with eventually dissipates. Because when Arthur Richter goes and grabs the pool stick, what does Mr. Wimpey do? He walks 15 feet from one side of the bar to the other like this. Now this isn't a, hey, let's have a conversation about life and find out why you're so upset. It's, hey, you know what, you want to fight, let's do this. That's exactly what's going on. When Mr. Wimpey hit Mr. Richter on the ground on the left side of the bar and he's dragging him around by his feet and he tries to kick him in the face, was he in imminent danger at that point? Was he in imminent danger when Mr. Vasquez was walking over? He didn't do anything. Mr. Wimpey even told you that he never threw a punch. Mr. Vasquez never threw a punch at him. Not once. The only thing that he did was a bear hug. And why was he doing that? Because if you remember from the video, Mr. Richter's on the ground and he's about to get pummeled. And Mr. Vasquez is trying to stop that. That's all he's trying to do. Now that may constitute unwanted contact by Mr. Wimpey, but does that rise to enough provocation to warrant deadly force? And let's talk about knowingly and deadly force. Let's talk about, the defense counsel makes a big deal about there's no weapons used. There's no guns, there's no knives, there's no bats. You don't need that. You can kill someone with your bare hands. And you saw it on video. It's not just one punch that he's hanging his hat on. Remember the punch from camera angle 5? It's almost the exact same punch that gets thrown, and it's not a jab. If anybody's familiar with throwing punches, if I come at you and go like this, that's not a jab. That's a jab. Not this. A little bit different kind of force when you're coming that way. And what you notice from camera angle 5 is Mr. Vasquez grabs his head like this. Now, the expert wants you to believe that he's just fixing his hair because he wants to look pretty for the rest of the brawl. But let's be real. That's not what's going on. He's grabbing his head because he's hurt. The damage has already been done at that point. And even if you want to believe that when he gets thrown to the ground, that that's what initially caused it, Mr. Wimpey exacerbated that damage by throwing the punch. Make no mistake about it, each time he hit Mr. Vasquez, those were brain-jarring shots. And that's the type of injury, the brain moving back and forth, that leads to subdural hematomas. That's the type of injury that can potentially lead to death. And that's exactly what Dr. Haney told me. She said, blunt force trauma, complications. What were those complications? He's in the hospital for 4 days. They do a craniectomy. He has multiple seizures. He has a stroke. He never regains consciousness. And all of that is due to blunt force trauma to the head. He didn't just have some spontaneous stroke just before he got punched in the face. What's the likelihood of that? If that actually happened, then maybe Mr. Ayad should go buy a Mega Millions ticket. But that's probably better odds. The video evidence is clear. And defense counsel can stand here all he wants and talk about provocation. He can talk about fear. But at any point during that video, if we're going to look at body language and talk about posturing, does Mr. Wimpey ever look frightened? Was he defending himself when he picked up that beer bottle and whipped it at Arthur Richter? Or when he's walking out like this? And why is he walking out with his arms extended? Because he just kicked some people's ass. That's why. And he's proud of it. And then defense counsel wants you to believe that he's actually defending Mr. Mossad when he runs back into the bar. Well, let's talk about that. So the first time Mr. Richter comes out, he throws a couple beer bottles at the truck. Yes, Ms. Whitball said she was concerned that they could have caused some damage, maybe broke the windshield, but it didn't. The beer bottles didn't hit anybody. We're talking about damage to property. Now, why do you think Khalil Mossad got out of that truck? Because he's got a nice white Dodge Ram, and some assholes putting dents in it by throwing beer bottles at it, and he's going to go handle it. And that's exactly what happens. And at that point, Mr. Richter is not an imminent threat to anyone. Because if you notice in the video, he turns around and he runs away, and he actually tries to shut the door. But Mossad's able to bust through and starts fighting with Mr. Richter. And when you look at that video, if Mr. Wimpey's going to claim that he was just simply defending Mr. Mossad, then why is it okay for him to do that, Mr. Vasquez, not to defend his nephew, who's getting pummeled by Mr. Mossad? See, there's inconsistencies in what the defense is trying to present to you. Everything that he did was okay, but everything that everybody else did was not, including Mr. Mossad. He's the only one who did anything wrong. Why is he on trial? Mr. Vasquez did absolutely nothing at the end to deserve that punch to the face that rendered him unconscious. And if you look at camera angle 11, you'll see he just steps back and he's standing next to the pool table, and then boom, he's out. And yes, the two firefighters that testified talked about witnesses saying there were kicks, right? Kicks to the head. Witnesses said that. Those are pretty chaotic situations, okay? And occasionally, witnesses can get things wrong. But if you notice from the video, the only person that you see throwing kicks throughout the fight is Mr. Wimpey. And the last punch that renders Mr. Vasquez unconscious, what do you see Mr. Wimpey doing? He's kicking Mr. Richter, who's laying right next to Mr. Vasquez. It would be easy for a witness to confuse that Mr. Vasquez was kicked in the head. But the only person that we actually see kicking anyone is Mr. Wimpey. Because people that are laying on the ground are in imminent danger, right? Don't buy into the alternate theories. Don't buy into the self-defense. Because here's the issue with self-defense. Self-defense is that there's a responsibility on the defense. See, it is the state's burden of proof to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. But when you assert self-defense, there's a little bit of what we call a burden shift. And the defense has to prove beyond a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant acted as self-defense. And when that happens, you have to demand that from this table. And when you demand that, you find that they don't meet that threshold. Because in the jury instructions, it states the following. To establish a claim of self-defense, the defendant must prove by a greater weight of the evidence that A, he was not at fault in creating the situation giving rise to the event in which death occurred. Not at fault. Watch the video. Who's the first person to put his hands on somebody? Carl Wimpey. He grabs Arthur Richter by the throat and the fight's on. He could have ignored everything from the start. So what if some little chihuahua was talking shit? Who cares? He's a little chihuahua, right? And if he's a little chihuahua, is he truly an imminent threat? So he's popping off a little bit to his friends. Who cares? Get up and walk away. But that's not what Mr. Wimpey did, because he's not going to let somebody talk to him like that. And that's how we end up in this situation. Yes, Arthur Richter initiated it, but Mr. Wimpey's equally culpable. Because he chose to engage instead of doing the right thing and walk away. Anybody can throw hands with somebody else. That doesn't necessarily take courage or bravery. But it does take courage to walk away. Especially when you know you can win a fight without a problem. Now here's the other issue. Whether he violated a duty to retreat or avoid the danger. So again, he claims his personal space is being invaded, and he's got people around him. And what's his back next to? Front door. So he's got two options at this point. He can exit the bar and step outside, or he can continue to engage. He can engage somebody who's being restrained by somebody else that no longer has a weapon in his hand. He can continue to engage somebody who has a 60-year-old man stepping in front of him trying to stop the fight. Or he can walk away. And he chose to engage instead of walk away. And that's where he made the mistake. Because a combination of punches can be deadly force. Not just one, but a combination. And a combination of punches can be serious physical harm. And don't listen to the he didn't intend, because that doesn't matter. Intent is not in the jury instructions. Intent is not in the indictment. It's not in the code sections. Ladies and gentlemen, the state's proven this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And we ask you to find the defendant guilty. Thank you.